Commander Talia Vex stood motionless as the human delegation entered the chamber. The peace talks between the Salatian Dominion and Earth's coalition had reached a critical juncture, and she, the most decorated military officer in the Dominion, had been assigned as security detail. "Commander, ensure nothing disrupts these negotiations," Admiral Roth had ordered her. "Our species cannot afford another century of conflict." She observed the humans with clinical detachment. Their soft, varied skin tones and expressive faces were so different from Salatian uniformity: silver blue skin, iridescent eyes, and the characteristic bony ridge that crowned their heads. The lead human diplomat approached. "Commander Vex, I'm Nathaniel Reed. I understand you'll be overseeing security during our stay." His voice had an unusual timbre that resonated oddly in her secondary auditory canal. She nodded curtly, extending her arm in the formal Salatian greeting. "The Dominion ensures the safety of all who come in peace." Then it happened. As their hands met, a jolt of heat shot up her arm and spread across her chest. Talia jerked back, nearly reaching for her sidearm in instinctive response. "Is everything all right?" Reed asked, concern evident in those strangely mobile features. "Static discharge," she lied smoothly, even as her skin tingled where they'd touched. "Our atmospheric systems sometimes create such anomalies." Throughout the initial talks, Talia stood at attention, but her focus kept drifting to Reed. The sensation from their contact hadn't diminished; instead, it had spread, a warmth circulating through her body that was both foreign and disturbingly pleasant. That night in her quarters, Talia ran diagnostics on herself. Body temperature elevated by 1.2 degrees. Heart rate increased by 7%. Hormonal fluctuations detected. None of it made sense. Salatians did not experience physical reactions to other species; their biology was engineered for optimal control and efficiency. "Computer, display historical records of Salatian human physiological interactions," she commanded. No significant biological interactions recorded beyond standard medical data, the computer responded. Over the following days, the condition worsened. Each time Reed entered a room, her senses heightened. She could distinguish his scent from other humans, a complex signature that triggered something primal within her. During a demonstration of Earth's terraforming technology, Reed approached her again. "You've been avoiding me, Commander," he said quietly. "Have I committed some cultural offense?" "No," she replied stiffly. "I am merely performing my duties." "Then perhaps you could explain why your eyes dilate when I enter a room? Or why your skin flushes slightly darker whenever I speak directly to you?" His perception startled her. Humans weren't supposed to notice such subtle changes. "You are mistaken," she said, but even to her ears, the denial sounded hollow. Later that evening, as negotiations concluded for the day, Reed deliberately brushed past her in the corridor. This time, the heat surged through her so intensely that she gasped aloud. He turned, his expression a mixture of curiosity and something else, something that made the heat inside her coil tighter. "What's happening between us?" he asked softly. "Nothing is happening," she insisted, though her body betrayed her with visible tremors. "I've studied xenobiology extensively, Commander. This isn't nothing." His voice lowered. "Whatever this is, it's affecting you physiologically." "It is merely an allergic reaction," she managed. Reed stepped closer, and the warmth increased exponentially. "Is it painful?" "No," she admitted before she could stop herself. "It is intense. Would you permit a medical examination? Our scientists might." "No." The vehemence in her voice surprised them both. The thought of being studied like a specimen was unbearable. More unbearable was the thought that they might find a way to stop these sensations, sensations that, despite her confusion, she was beginning to crave. "Then let me help you understand this," Reed offered. Unofficially. As he extended his hand again, Talia knew she stood at a precipice. The fire inside her demanded his touch, even as her training screamed against such vulnerability. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out. 7 cycles had passed since her first contact with Nathaniel Reed, and Commander Talia Vex was slowly unraveling. She'd thrown herself into her duties with manic intensity, reviewing security protocols until her vision blurred, conducting personnel drills at all hours, and volunteering for double shifts that kept her away from the diplomatic wing where the humans resided. "You look terrible," said Lieutenant Corinne during their morning briefing. "Have you entered early molt?" "That's inappropriate, Lieutenant," she snapped, though she knew her appearance betrayed her. Her normally lustrous skin had dulled to a flat gray, and the ridge on her head had developed stress fractures visible to anyone who looked closely. "I'm merely concerned for operational readiness," Corinne replied carefully. "If you're ill." "I am not ill. Complete the perimeter adjustments as ordered." She dismissed him with a gesture that trembled slightly. In truth, she was worse than ill. Every day away from the human diplomat intensified the burning need inside her. Her nights were plagued by dreams so vivid and disturbing that she disabled the biometric monitors in her quarters to avoid triggering a medical alert. That afternoon, she stepped into a lift and froze. Reed's scent lingered in the enclosed space, triggering an involuntary shudder that nearly brought her to her knees. He had been here, perhaps minutes ago. The proximity of his recent presence was enough to set her burning again. "Control," she whispered to herself. "You are Salation. You are in control." The mantra, repeated since childhood, rang hollow now. Later, during a formal diplomatic function, catastrophe struck. Reed entered the gathering in formal Earth attire, a dark suit that accentuated his tall frame. The sight of him hit Talia like a physical blow. She staggered, dropping the ceremonial staff she carried. The clatter drew every eye in the room. "Commander?" Admiral Roth's voice carried a warning. Reed moved toward her, concern evident. "Are you all right?" "Stay back," she hissed, low enough that only he could hear. His proximity was unbearable, the heat flaring so intensely she feared others might see it radiating from her skin. "You're unwell. Let me help you," he insisted, reaching for her arm. "Do not touch me." The words emerged as a desperate plea rather than an order. Somehow, she made it through the function, standing rigid at her post, focusing on a distant point on the wall. But afterward, the withdrawal symptoms hit harder than ever. She barely made it to her quarters before collapsing, her body racked with fever and tremors. In desperation, she accessed the ship's restricted medical archives. If this was some human bioweapon, some subtle attack on the Dominion through its military leadership, she needed to know. Hours of research yielded nothing until she expanded her search to include pre-enhancement era Salation biology. There, buried in historical medical journals, she found something that stopped her cold. Pair-bonding physiological response in pre-modern Salations, the article was titled. The symptoms described matched hers with terrifying accuracy. Long before the genetic enhancements that had made Salations the disciplined, logical species they now were, her ancestors had experienced intense biological mating bonds. These connections had been engineered out of their genome 3 centuries ago, deemed inefficient and unnecessarily complicated for a species focused on advancement. But why would a human trigger this? Unless. Her research shifted to human biochemistry. Their hormone production, the complex pheromones they emitted unconsciously, their electrical skin conductivity, all dramatically different from any species the Salations had encountered before. "No," she whispered as the terrible truth dawned. "It cannot be." A ping from her communication console jolted her from her research. A message from Reed. "I know something is wrong. Meet me in Observation Deck C at midnight if you want to talk. No diplomatic channels, no records. Just answers." Talia stared at the message for a long time. Meeting him alone would be dangerous, not because she feared him, but because she feared herself. The burning had become nearly unbearable. If they were alone together, what might she do? And yet, she needed answers. She needed to understand why this human, of all beings in the vast universe, had awakened something inside her that should have been extinct for generations. As ship's midnight approached, Talia made her decision. Knowledge was control, and she desperately needed to regain control. She would meet Reed, maintain her distance, and discover what connection existed between them. What she couldn't admit, even to herself, was the anticipation that coursed through her at the thought of seeing him again, an anticipation that matched the burning heat that hadn't left her since the moment their hands first touched. Observation Deck C was deserted at this hour, the vast dome transparent to reveal the stunning vista of stars beyond. Talia arrived first, positioning herself strategically near the exit, maintaining space for quick retreat if necessary. When Reed entered, her body reacted instantly, heart rate accelerated, temperature spiking, skin flushing with telltale iridescence. She gripped the railing to steady herself. "Thank you for coming," he said softly, keeping his distance as if sensing her discomfort. "I brought something." He placed a small device on the deck between them. "It's a biometric dampener. It will mask any unusual readings from both of us from the ship's sensors. I thought you might appreciate the privacy." The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught her off guard. "How did you obtain Salation technology?" A small smile. "I didn't. It's Earth tech. We value privacy too." Silence stretched between them as stars glittered overhead. Finally, Reed spoke again. "I've been researching what might be happening, and I found something interesting in old xenobiology archives. Something about Salation evolutionary history." Talia stiffened. "And what would a human diplomat know of Salation biology?" "Before I was a diplomat, I specialized in comparative xenobiology. It's why I was chosen for this mission." He took a careful step forward. "Your species once had a profound capacity for biological pair bonding. It was engineered out during what your history calls the Great Enhancement. You should not have access to such information," she said, but there was no force behind her words. "The information exists in Earth archives, preserved from early contact between our species." Another step closer. "What's happening to you, to us, is unprecedented, but not unexplainable." The proximity was overwhelming. The burning beneath her skin intensified with each word, each step he took. "Human biochemistry is complex," he continued. "Our hormones, pheromones, even our electrical fields are unlike anything in known space. My theory is that something in my biochemical makeup has triggered a dormant genetic pathway in you, reactivating what your ancestors experienced as bonding." "That is impossible," she whispered, but she knew he was right. Her own research had led to the same conclusion. "Is it painful?" he asked gently. "What you're feeling?" She considered lying but found she couldn't. "Not pain, exactly. It is like fire, but not burning. Like hunger, but not for food." The admission cost her greatly. "And it's getting worse, isn't it? The longer you avoid me." She nodded once, sharply. "I feel it too," he admitted. "Not as intensely as you, perhaps, but since we touched, there's been a connection I can't explain. Dreams. Sensations. Awareness of you even when you're not present." The revelation stunned her. "You experience this as well?" "Yes. Though I suspect what I feel is a shadow of what you're enduring." He moved closer still, now just an arm's length away. "I've spoken with my medical team. There may be a way to help, to stabilize what's happening without fighting against it." "What do you mean?" "Your ancestors didn't fight this feeling. They embraced it. The bond formed naturally, and once established, it balanced. The initial intensity gave way to something sustainable. He extended his hand, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. I believe if we accept what's happening instead of fighting it, the symptoms will stabilize. Talia stared at his outstretched hand. Everything in her Salation training screamed against such vulnerability, such surrender to biological impulse. Yet the fire within her reached for him like a living thing. This could be dangerous, she warned. I am not entirely in control. His eyes held understanding, not fear. I trust you, Commander. Slowly, she extended her hand. As their fingers touched, the burning exploded into something transcendent. Talia gasped as sensation cascaded through her, the weeks of denial giving way to overwhelming relief. Reed's reaction was equally profound. His pupils dilated, his breathing quickened, and she could see his pulse racing at his throat. Remarkable, he whispered, his voice strained. I had no idea it would be so. Intense, she finished, finding herself suddenly capable of perceiving his emotions as clearly as if they were her own. I can feel what you feel. Their hands remained connected, neither willing to break the circuit of relief that flowed between them. For the first time in weeks, the burning pain had transformed into something else, a warm, pulsing connection that felt right in a way she couldn't articulate. What happens now? She asked, vulnerability evident in her voice. Now, he said gently, we figure this out together. Not as Salation and human, but as two people caught in something extraordinary. As the stars wheeled overhead, Talia felt centuries of engineered Salation control giving way to something older and more primal, but also, somehow, more profound. Whatever this connection was, it could not be denied or engineered away. It could only be embraced. The following days unfolded in a delicate dance of duty and discovery. Publicly, Commander Talia Vex and diplomat Nathaniel Reed maintained professional distance, their interactions formal and correct. Privately, they explored the unprecedented bond forming between them. The physical symptoms have stabilized, Talia noted during one of their clandestine meetings in her quarters. The burning is still present, but manageable now. Reed, Nathaniel, as she'd begun to think of him, nodded. The dreams continue, though. Last night, I dreamed I was swimming in a Salation ocean. I could breathe underwater. I could feel the ridge on my head cutting through currents. She studied him with fascination. Those are my memories, from training exercises on the homeworld. The bond is allowing you to access them during sleep. And you? Any unusual dreams? Talia felt her skin flush with iridescent color. I dream of your homeworld. Green forests. The sensation of rain on skin that burns far hotter than mine. She hesitated. And other things. His knowing smile sent a wave of heat through her. Other things? Human mating rituals, she admitted. They are different from what I expected. Is that so? He moved closer, the now familiar sensation of their proximity sending pleasant ripples across her skin. Different how? More tactile. More prolonged. She forced herself to maintain eye contact despite her discomfort with such open discussion. Salations do not mate for pleasure. The genetic adjustments eliminated such inefficiencies. That sounds like a significant loss, he said softly. When his fingers brushed her hand, the bond between them flared with shared sensation. His curiosity, his desire, flowed into her consciousness alongside a profound respect. I would not object to further exploration, she said carefully. For scientific understanding. His smile widened. Scientific understanding. Of course. The first touch of his lips against hers sent shockwaves through the bond. Talia gasped as new sensations cascaded through her, his pleasure echoing her own, amplifying it, returning it in waves that threatened to overwhelm them both. Too much, he whispered against her mouth. Not enough, she admitted, surrendering to instincts her ancestors had embraced without shame. Their exploration was tender, unhurried. Nathaniel guided her through human intimacy with patience and wonder, while Talia discovered that her body remembered what her mind had never known, the ancient ways of connection her species had sacrificed for efficiency. When their bodies finally joined, the bond between them exploded into new dimensions. The burning that had plagued her transformed into ecstasy, pleasure cascading between them in endless feedback loops. She could feel his astonishment at sensations no human had ever experienced, even as she lost herself in the revelation of her own body's capabilities. Afterward, they lay entangled, silver-blue skin against warm bronze, the bond humming contentedly between them. "No research prepared me for that," Nathaniel murmured against her neck. "No Salation would believe it possible," she agreed. "We are taught that physical pleasure is primitive, unnecessary." "And now?" She considered the question seriously. "Now I understand what my species surrendered in the name of advancement. There is wisdom in connection that logic cannot comprehend." Their discovery had implications beyond the personal. Medical scans revealed fascinating changes in both their physiologies. Nathaniel's cellular regeneration had accelerated dramatically, while Talia had developed increased resistance to environmental toxins that typically affected Salations. "The bond appears to be sharing our biological strengths," she noted as they reviewed the data. "Your human adaptability is expressing itself in my immune system. And your Salation resilience is enhancing my cellular structure," he added. "Imagine the implications for both our species." The thought gave her pause. The Dominion would view this as contamination. They engineered these responses out of us for a reason. "Because they feared loss of control," Nathaniel suggested gently. "But what I'm experiencing isn't a loss. It's an expansion. I'm still myself, just more." Talia rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his singular heart, so different from her dual cardiac chambers. If others knew this was possible, it could change everything, he finished. The question is whether we're ready for that change. As dawn broke and they prepared to resume their public roles, Talia faced him with new resolve. "What exists between us cannot remain secret forever. Sooner or later, the Dominion will discover it. And when they do?" She squared her shoulders, every inch the commander despite her newfound vulnerability. "Then we will show them what they've forgotten, that connection brings strength, not weakness." For the first time since her biology had awakened to his touch, Talia felt no conflict between her duty and her desires. Whatever came next, they would face it together, bound by something older and more powerful than either of their civilizations had anticipated. The final day of peace negotiations arrived with a tension that permeated the Great Hall. Representatives from both species sat arrayed on opposite sides, with Admiral Roth and the Earth Coalition's Chancellor Lawson at the center. Commander Talia Vex stood at her post, outwardly composed despite the knowledge that everything was about to change. Across the room, Nathaniel Reed caught her eye briefly, their bond humming with shared resolve. "The treaty before us represents a new chapter for both our species," Admiral Roth began. "After centuries of distance and occasional conflict, the Salation Dominion and Earth's coalition have found common ground. The terms had been meticulously negotiated: shared territory in neutral star systems, exchange of non-military technology, protocols for dispute resolution. On paper, it was a triumph of diplomacy. But Talia knew it wasn't enough. Not anymore. Chancellor Lawson spoke next. "This agreement ensures peace, but I believe we have an opportunity for something more significant: true cooperation between our peoples." Admiral Roth's expression hardened slightly. "The Dominion prefers clarity in our arrangements, Chancellor. Cooperation leaves too much room for interpretation." "Perhaps," Nathaniel interjected smoothly, "we could include provisions for scientific and cultural exchange programs. Small-scale interactions to build understanding." Talia felt his strategy through their bond, a gentle nudge toward the revelation they both knew must come. "The Dominion has no need for cultural contamination," Roth replied dismissively. Our way of life has served us for millennia. Has it? The words left Talia's mouth before she could reconsider, drawing every eye in the hall. Protocol demanded she remain silent unless addressed directly. Commander Vex, Roth's voice carried warning. You forget yourself. With respect, Admiral, I believe what I have to say is relevant to these proceedings. She stepped forward, abandoning her post. Through the bond, she felt Nathaniel's support, his steady confidence flowing into her. The Salatian way of life has not remained unchanged for millennia. We have engineered ourselves repeatedly, each time sacrificing aspects of our nature deemed inefficient. Her voice strengthened. But what if some of those sacrifices were mistakes? Murmurs rippled through both delegations. Explain yourself, Commander, Roth demanded, his ridge darkening with anger. Talia looked to Nathaniel, who nodded slightly. Together, they moved to the center of the hall, standing side by side. During these negotiations, Diplomat Reed and I have discovered something unprecedented. She drew a steady breath. Contact between our species has triggered a biological response in me, the reactivation of bonding pathways our ancestors possessed before the Great Enhancement. Gasps erupted from the Salatian delegation. One elder stood, accusatory. You claim to have experienced primitive mating urges? Impossible. Not impossible, Nathaniel interjected calmly. Merely unexpected. Human biochemistry appears capable of activating dormant Salatian genetic traits. This is a contamination. Roth thundered. Commander Vex will report for immediate medical isolation and purging. No. Talia's refusal rang through the hall. What has happened is not contamination, but evolution. The bond between us has produced remarkable physiological benefits for both. She gestured to the medical officer present. Scan us. Compare our readings to our baseline data. The evidence is irrefutable. Reluctantly, the officer approached with scanning equipment. The results displayed on the main screen for all to see: enhanced cellular regeneration, improved immune response, unprecedented neural synchronization. These changes, the medical officer began. Our improvements, Talia finished firmly. Improvements our species denied itself out of fear of losing control. Chancellor Lawson leaned forward, intrigued. You're suggesting this bond could benefit both our species? We're suggesting it already has, Nathaniel replied. And not just physically. The mental connection we share has allowed unprecedented understanding between our kinds. He extended his hand, and Talia took it without hesitation. The bond between them surged visibly, a faint blue luminescence where their skin connected. This is what we've forgotten, Talia addressed her people directly. Connection doesn't weaken us, it strengthens us. The Salatian drive for individual perfection has cost us the power of true bonds. The hall fell silent as the implications settled over both delegations. Finally, an elderly human scientist approached cautiously. If this bond is replicable between others of our species, it could revolutionize interspecies relations throughout known space. It could also destroy millennia of Salatian genetic purity, Roth countered. Or it could heal a wound in your evolutionary history, Chancellor Lawson suggested. Perhaps what was engineered out was not a weakness, but a strength you had yet to fully understand. The debate raged for hours, but Talia and Nathaniel remained united at its center, their bond an undeniable testament to possibilities neither species had imagined. When the final treaty was signed, it contained provisions neither delegation had anticipated: the establishment of a joint research institute dedicated to studying the Salatian human bond phenomenon, with Talia and Nathaniel as its first subjects and directors. As the delegations dispersed, they found themselves alone in the Great Hall, their future simultaneously uncertain and brilliantly clear. They're still afraid, Talia noted, feeling the lingering tension of her people. Fear is natural when facing the unknown, Nathaniel replied, his fingers intertwining with hers. But they'll learn, as we did, that some unknowns are worth embracing. She turned to face him fully, the commander's mask falling away. What we've started here, it changes everything. For both our worlds. Yes, he agreed, drawing her closer. And for us. Are you ready for that? Through their bond, she let him feel her answer, determination, hope, and a fierce joy that no genetic engineering could extinguish. The fire that had once threatened to consume her now burned steady and bright, illuminating a path forward neither of them could have imagined alone. Together, she said simply, the word carrying the weight of worlds changing course. As they stepped out into a future neither of their species had prepared for, Talia realized that the greatest strength wasn't found in control or enhancement or genetic purity. It was found in surrender, to connection, to change, and to the unprecedented possibilities that arose when different worlds collided and ignited.